This is the 75-gallon Pennsylvania Woods Vivarium conclusion with American toads and 5-line skinks. In the previous video, the skinks were just waking up from a dormancy period and were much more skittish. But as we can see, Pharaoh has established himself inside the enclosure and claimed it his own. These lizards may have come a long way from being skittish and shy to now showing confidence and being very dominant inside the enclosure. Amzie, which is Pharaoh's mate, the female skink, was not able to be documented for this video due to her still being more skittish than the others. Even though he looks very bold and dominant, if you get a little bit too close, Pharaoh is still skittish, and except for this clip here, it's been very difficult being able to document him feeding, along with the other skinks. Making her first actual appearance inside of the enclosure is the female offspring to Pharaoh and Amzie, the young 5-line skink named Ruby. Even though she's under the protective care of Pharaoh, Ruby still shows signs of being a young independent female skink. As she lived on her own before her time in the enclosure, she still goes off to do her thing time from time. The future is very bright for this skink dynasty family, as the trio will be going inside a 55-gallon aquarium to accommodate their specific needs, as they will be showcased as the stars of the upcoming southern woods. This enclosure between the skinks and toads had a 100% success rate, with no deaths, many of the plants surviving, and all of the animals inside adapting and thriving to live amongst each other. Pharaoh may be the leader of the lizards, but he is not, however, in control of the other inhabitants of this enclosure, the American toad pair. It is very rare for American toad males to outcompete the American toad females due to their smaller size. However, Pius manages to get by rivaling the same strength as Ace, also showing more dominant behavior while feeding, choosing to go after the larger prey items and seeming to be more opportunistic, also a more dominant hunter. Probably the most familiar face of the 75-gallon Pennsylvania Woods Vivarium, Ace, the young female American toad, who has greeted us in previous videos, once again comes out to greet us, hoping to get a nice snack. In the experiences of the 75-gallon Pennsylvania Woods Vivarium, the female American toads have always been the more friendly, also more dominant inhabitants inside the enclosure as compared to their male counterparts. The American toads have shown no aggressive behavior towards the 5-line skinks, after their first interaction in the very first video of this trilogy. Pius and Ace will not be joining Pharaoh and the other skinks inside their new adventure in the 55-gallon southern woods. This reason is because the American toad pair is hopefully going to be used in an environmental project to reproduce and give back to the environment that they were taken from. These two American toads have shown such promising behavior, being very interesting, adventurous, and intelligent, more so than any of the other American toads that I've kept in the past. These two American toads have shown the most promise and have shown to be worth investing in, having various occasions of Pius attempting to mate with Ace. For this reason, these two American toads will be joining up with some wood frogs and other American toads, possibly their offspring, in an attempt to give back to the environment and create a scientific breakthrough inside a 125-gallon. These are two of the most intelligent American toads that I have ever seen documented on video in captivity. Specifically, they've shown the ability to adapt and learn inside this enclosure. The most fascinating display of intelligence by these American toads is both of their abilities to have learned to use a water area instead of a small water dish. This is one of the most interesting observations between both of these toads showing interest in using the water area. I've created this water area to simulate what it would be like for American toads to come across a small puddle in the wild. This is also what American toads utilize to breed, which is what brings hope that these two American toads, being the only ones that I've ever seen in captivity showing interest in bodies of water, will attempt to mate inside of the new enclosure that's awaiting them. Ace shows her aggressive behavior while feeding, choosing to jump on the platform that the skinks utilize just to catch her prey item, using every aspect of the tank to her advantage. Another interesting observation with these two American toads specifically is while they are feeding. American toads show much aggression and dominance in territorial behavior when they feed. However, these two American toads are very passive with each other in terms of food. They will not lunge at each other or show any territorial or aggressive behavior, being very passive with one another, which is a trait in American toads that I have not seen in captivity, while both of them display this behavior. Whenever it's feeding time, even if the toads haven't seen each other for days, resting in different sides of the enclosure, wherever the crickets are released into the enclosure, they both seem to join up and eat alongside one another. Probably the most anticipated moments of this trilogy are seeing the skinks and the toads interact, and we haven't seen that a great deal of times on either of the past two previous videos. And while I see it happen daily between both species, this is a more uncommon event on the videos of the interaction, how peaceful the toads and the skinks interact with one another. Due to the toads having very slow-moving and calm behavior, the skinks observe the toads as no potential threat. This was the very first video documentation between the interaction between Ace and Pharaoh inside the enclosure. In a 75-gallon, they have various spaces to avoid one another, but this was the very first time in documentation that both animals decided to settle down and relax near one another, just observing each other, as both of these specific individuals would be the largest inhabitants of this enclosure of their respective species. It is unclear whether they enjoyed each other's company or were able to tolerate being in the presence of one another. But after this was taken, both Pharaoh and Ace remained in the same spot for a very long period of time. This was very interesting behavior observed by Pharaoh, choosing to go and lay with the toads whenever he has various other places he could be inhabiting inside the enclosure. With this encounter between Pharaoh and Pius, Pharaoh willingly chose to come from his basking spot at some point in the day to lay beside Pius. With these encounters of Pharaoh and both of the toads, it should prove how peaceful they are inside of captivity. Here is another encounter between Ace and Pharaoh right in the middle of the 75-gallon woods vivarium. This camera angle shows how large Pharaoh truly is as compared to Ace. The future is very bright for the inhabitants of the 75-gallon. The skinks will be getting their very own 55-gallon vivarium, styled after the southern woods, which is where they are from. Pharaoh will have his very own territory to maintain his grip on the skink dynasty, and possibly Amzi can be documented for one of the first times on video for the future. Even though this is the conclusion to the 75-gallon Pennsylvania Woods vivarium, the Pennsylvania Woods will still go on, however, inside a new 125-gallon. The new Pennsylvania Woods will be home to Ace and Pius, as well as another pair of American toads. This group of toads will also be joined by a small group of wood frogs, and should they not work out, what will replace them will be a familiar face that you've already seen on this YouTube channel, the northern leopard frog. Thank you to everybody who's followed this build of the 75-gallon Pennsylvania Woods vivarium from 2014 all the way to the progress made in 2018. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications, as we will be releasing new content on the build of the 125-gallon and all of the process being made, as well as updates from the animals. And be sure to check out our new Facebook page. You can find it at PA Woods Vivariums.